Welcome to the story of another country. Today we're heading to South America to uncover the rich, diverse, and often turbulent history of Brazil. From indigenous civilizations and colonial conquest to empire, republic, and modern democracy, this is the story of Latin America's largest nation. Long before Europeans arrived, Brazil was home to hundreds of indigenous groups, each with distinct cultures, languages, and ways of life. These communities thrived in the forests, along the rivers, and across the vast plains, practicing agriculture, fishing, hunting, and trade. Far from being isolated or static, many indigenous societies developed complex social structures and oral traditions, built elaborate settlements, and maintained vast networks of exchange across the continent. In 1500, Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral landed on Brazil's shores, claiming it for Portugal. At first, the colony seemed of little value, but soon Brazil wood, used to make red dye, became highly sought after. Portuguese settlers began arriving, and along with them came forced labor, especially the enslavement of indigenous peoples. Later, as sugarcane plantations grew in the northeast, the demand for labor skyrocketed. Millions of Africans were forcibly brought to Brazil, making it the largest recipient of enslaved people in the Atlantic slave trade. This mix of indigenous, African, and European peoples would shape Brazil's cultural identity for centuries to come. In the 17th century, Brazil became the world's largest sugar producer. Vast sugarcane plantations spread along the northeast coast, especially in Pernambuco and Bahia, worked by millions of enslaved Africans under brutal, dehumanizing conditions. The sugar economy brought immense wealth to Portuguese landowners and merchants who built grand estates and exported their riches across the Atlantic. But this prosperity was built on immense suffering. Disease, violence, and relentless labor decimated generations of enslaved people. In the 1690s, gold was discovered in the interior, particularly in the region of Minas Gerais. This triggered Brazil's own gold rush, drawing tens of thousands of settlers, miners, and fortune seekers into the heart of the country. Entire towns sprang up overnight. Ouro Preto, Mariana, and others became booming urban centers. The Portuguese crown demanded a hefty share of this wealth, introducing the quinto tax. 1/5 of all mined gold went directly to Lisbon. This revenue became crucial for financing Portugal's ambitions in Europe. As a result, Brazil's population began to shift inland, away from the coast. New roads and trade routes were carved through indigenous lands, pushing European influence deeper into the continent and leading to more displacement and resistance. A new Creole elite, people of Portuguese descent born in Brazil, began to rise in wealth and status, yet they remained politically powerless. Brazil was still a colony, tightly governed from Lisbon, and its growing wealth only reinforced the structures of inequality and colonial dependence. Then, in 1808, everything changed. Fleeing Napoleon's invasion of Portugal, the Portuguese royal family moved their court to Rio de Janeiro, the only European monarchy ever to rule from the Americas. Brazil was no longer just a colony. It was the heart of the Portuguese Empire. When King João VI returned to Portugal in 1821, he left his son Dom Pedro to govern Brazil. As demands grew in Lisbon to reduce Brazil once again to colonial status, tensions rose. Dom Pedro, supported by many Brazilians, resisted these calls. On September 7, 1822, he declared Brazil's independence in what became known as the Cry of Ipiranga. Shortly after, he was crowned Emperor Pedro I. Though there were regional uprisings and resistance from Portuguese loyalists, Brazil avoided the widespread violence that marked independence movements elsewhere in Latin America. The Empire of Brazil endured for over 6 decades, During this period, the country expanded its borders, developed a national identity, and saw modest industrialization. Emperor Pedro II, who ruled for nearly 50 years, was admired for his intellect and progressive ideals. Yet despite signs of progress, the country remained deeply unequal. Slavery persisted, forming the backbone of Brazil's agricultural economy. But resistance grew steadily through slave revolts, legal challenges, abolitionist newspapers, and international condemnation. The abolition of slavery finally came in 1888 with the signing of the Lei Áurea, Golden Law, ending centuries of forced labor and marking a major turning point in Brazilian history. But the end of slavery did not bring stability. In 1889, the monarchy lost the support of key military and political elites. A coup, led by Republican officers, forced Emperor Pedro II into exile and declared the First Brazilian Republic. Although the empire had ended, many of the old hierarchies remained. Power stayed concentrated in the hands of a few, and Brazil's long journey towards social justice and inclusive democracy was only beginning. The First Brazilian Republic began with hopes for modernization and progress, but quickly revealed deep inequalities. Power was dominated by regional elites, especially the coffee-growing oligarchs of São Paulo and the cattle barons of Minas Gerais. Known as the coffee with milk politics, this arrangement kept the presidency rotating between their interests. While Brazil saw some infrastructure growth and immigration boomed, particularly from Italy, Germany, and Japan, most of the population remained poor and politically excluded. In 1930, Getúlio Vargas seized power in a coup, marking the start of a new era. Vargas ruled as a populist strongman, first as a provisional leader, then dictator, and finally elected president. He introduced labor protections, social welfare programs, and industrial policies that aimed to modernize the economy and appeal to workers. But his rule was also authoritarian, with censorship, repression of dissent, and a secret police force. The Vargas era left a complicated legacy of both social gains and centralized control. After a brief democratic interlude, the military took over in 1964, fearing communist influence and political instability. Brazil entered a dark period of dictatorship that lasted until 1985. While the military regime pursued economic growth, known as the Brazilian Miracle, it also used torture, censorship, and surveillance to silence opposition. Thousands of activists, students, and union leaders were imprisoned or disappeared. By the early 1980s, however, economic crisis and mass protests forced a transition. Civilian rule returned, and with it, a new constitution in 1988 that promised democracy, rights, and inclusion, though many challenges still remained. In 1989, Brazilians voted in their first direct presidential election in nearly 30 years. The following decades saw economic highs and lows. Brazil hosted the World Cup and the Olympics, lifted millions out of poverty through social programs, and gained new global prominence. But corruption scandals, political polarization, and social inequality continued to plague the country. Presidents came and went. Some celebrated, others impeached or jailed. Brazil's democracy endured challenges, but its people kept pushing for accountability, justice, and a better future. Today, Brazil is a vibrant, diverse nation, home to over 200 million people, countless cultures, and a vast landscape of rainforests, savannas, and megacities. It leads the world in biodiversity, music, and football, while grappling with economic disparity, environmental threats, and political uncertainty. Its people continue to shape global culture, from samba and carnival to literature, cuisine, and activism. Brazil's story is one of contradictions: beauty and struggle, unity and division, hope and hardship. Yet, through it all, Brazil moves forward. Its history is not just one of colonization and conflict, but of resilience, creativity, and transformation.